to Mission Majjhima. Ajahn.
Ajahn.
So tell us about the Cūḻa Assapura Sutta, Majjhima number 40.
So the shorter discourse at Assapura is similar to the previous sutta, the greater discourse at Assapura, Majjhima Nikaya 39. And just as in the previous discourse, the Buddha begins by speaking to the monks and saying, samanas, you call yourselves samanas, contemplatives, but how does one become worthy of that title so that the robes, requisites, food, lodging, and medicinal requisites given to you will be of great benefit to their donors, and you'll be worthy of that title. And then he exhorts them and says that one is not a true samana if one is given to one of these 12, what we call the upakilesa, and they're these defilements of the mind, which are also outlined largely in Majjhima Nikaya 7, which we've gone through. The simile of the cloth and stains of the samana, basically, is how they're categorized by the Buddha. They include, we have covetousness, ill will, irritability, acrimony, disdain, contempt, jealousy, stinginess, deviousness, deceit, corrupt wishes, and wrong view is the end. Final one. And these have to do with both the internal quality of the mind, but also many of them are relational, envy and sort of irritability, all these interesting relational kind of defilements. He says that if one does not give these up, then one is not worthy of the title contemplative, but that if one given to ill will, abandons ill will, etc., then they are worthy of the title samana. And then he goes on to speak about how outer form is not important in terms of this title of samana. So he goes through these lists of the 10 kinds of samana, which one found at the time of the Buddha, from the wearer of the robe, such as us, but also to the matted hair ascetic, to all these different versions of the ascetics that you'd find in the Buddha's time. And says that in each of these cases, if just taking on the form was enough to abandon internal negative states to be worthy of the term contemplative, then when someone had a child, immediately they'd go to them and say, become a wearer of rag robes, become a matted hair ascetic, little one. And but because the Buddha says, I see ascetics of these different categories still overcome with ill will, still overcome with disdain, with these upakilesa, I do not say that one is worthy simply because of the outer form of this title. Then he says that if one does give up these internal upakilesa, that it leads to this sort of pamoja cascade of well-being, which you've brilliantly outlined in a book, The Well-Being Cascade, and that well-being arises, which leads to rapture, calm in the body, to concentration, and then he talks about spreading, developing, and radiating the Brahmaviharas in every direction: metta, loving kindness, karuna, compassion, mudita, sympathetic joy or appreciation, rejoicing, and upekkha, equanimity, and which is very interesting considering that many of the upakilesa he just covered as stains are relational in nature. So this focus on the Brahmaviharas. And just as a man starving or dying of thirst would overcome with fever of heat, would come to a cool pond, an oasis, and bathe, even so one kind of can rest in these teachings. And specifically he says that even if one born as a member of each of the castes he goes through would go forth into the discipline of the Buddha, even so, it's as if a person dying of thirst would come from any direction and find this cool oasis and bathe. So sort of indicating that this path is open to all the different categories of person that were found in the Buddha's time by this categorization. And then he says that similarly, no matter what caste one comes from, if one cultivates in this way, one can achieve full awakening. So it's a slightly different way of looking at what the term samana, contemplative, means than the previous sutta, but I think a kind of beautiful supplement and different angle. So Ajahn, what would you pull out of this discourse? What do you find interesting?
Yeah, I really appreciate this sutta as it points to the inner dimensions, as you said, of a samana, a religious seeker, and us as Buddhist monastics. That's exactly what we are, but it really does apply to anyone who's wanting to practice a Buddhist path. It's not about the externals, whatever clothing we're wearing, whatever color. It's about what's internal. I think a nice Buddhist saying is, don't judge a monk by his cover. There's a famous medieval Christian saying that a monk is not judged by his habit, i.e. his external clothing, but by his habits. And here the Buddha takes it to another level of, a monk is not judged by his habit, but by his mental habits. So here the Buddha is pointing to all the flaws, the dredges, the corruptions, the stains of a samana, of a religious seeker. And it is these inner mental states, which even if one is a rag robe wearer or a covering themselves in dust or wears dreadlocks or does cold plunges, i.e. ritualistic bathing, or does all these other outer signs, which certainly myself as a young seeker was quite impressed with. I see someone who's got really long dreadlocks, and I think there's some inner depth that is being suggested there. And Buddha said it's not necessarily the case. And one really interesting thing about this sutta is I do think people do sometimes ask about the Buddha's humor. And I think this sutta is a great case for the Buddha's, the simile that he draws out. He says, if by simply wearing a robe, or by growing out dreadlocks, or by eating at intervals, or by being covered in dust, then someone automatically abandoned these upakilesas, these corruptions of mind, these stains of mind, the ill will, the covetousness, the stinginess, the jealousy. If just by doing these outer forms, one was able to give these up, then babies, one's parents and one's friends, they would all have these babies start growing out their dreadlocks and put them in robes and cover them in dust, because that's all it would take. And that's just hilarious. And the Buddha, it's true and it's funny to imagine, parents that we are fooled by these outward appearances. There's this anchoring bias. We see someone that's doing something different and we assume something about this halo effect. The Buddha, in a different discourse in the Anguttara Nikaya, points out 4 different ways that people can be inspired. Some people are inspired by outer appearance, rupa pasano. Some people are inspired by the voice or what someone says, gosa pasano. So other people are inspired by ascetic practices, this luka pasano. And other people are impressed with and inspired by the Dhamma that one speaks and lives. So yeah, it's not just the outers, but the internals that matter. Yeah, and Ajahn, what else would you like to draw out?
You're pointing out to the Buddha's humor, but also the simile he uses before pointing to the fact that a monastic not having given up these things is not a true samana is a mataja wrapped in a rag robe, basically a piece of cloth. And that's for some sort of archaic sword or weapon. And it's interesting to me that so many of these qualities of the upakilesa he lists are relational. It's such, we have this conceit, so much of the path is embarked on alone, but so much, as one knows from living in community, from practicing, of the karma we create and purify is through our relations with others. And many of the qualities he lists, from envy, irritability, acrimony, have this edge like a sword, this sort of, that sharp edge wrapped beneath the robes. And finally, just the very beginning, how he says that if one cultivates a true sense of recluseship, samana, that the offerings people have given to one become of great benefit. So this is not a selfish path. It has implications for others. What about you, Ajahn? Anything else to bring out?
One thing is that you read commentaries, what is this mataja, this weapon? And it's actually a double-edged weapon. So, and I think this is significant both relationally. I mean, we cut ourselves if we are wearing the garb of a Buddhist, or if you've got the Buddhist hat or whatever it is, or certainly us as monastics wearing the Buddhist flag, and we've got all these internal upakilesas, these defilements, then it cuts us first as we're misrepresenting, and there's this hypocrisy there, and it cuts other people. A very important point is also that the Buddha first goes into the things which are abandoned, and then he goes into developing the Brahma Viharas. And it's not like you have to, that's the only way to do it. We can do these in tandem, abandon the unwholesome and cultivate the wholesome at the same time. But sometimes in America, there is this foregrounding of the altruism, the positivity or outcome bias towards action and activity bias. Whereas just not doing, not having these evil and wholesome states, evil wishes, pop itcha, that's a huge thing in and of itself, even before we cultivate all these boundless mind states. So what is the word of the week?
The word of the week is patipada, which means practice, and it comes from the root pad, which means step or to go.
All right. So join us over in the Zoom in just a moment, or join us next week for Majjhima number 41, and practice the path. Until then.